Hey, so we're back for the last video, Being in Time. So we're in Division 2, Chapter 6, Temporality and Within Timeness as the Origin of the Vulgar Concept of Time. So this is going to finish us up, and we'll start, basically what Heidegger wants to do in this last chapter is investigate the way that Dasein relates to time in ordinary life as something objectively present, e.g. as something we can have or something we can lose, which is the way we kind of colloquially talk about time. Specifically, he wants to know how this vulgar conception of time relates to temporality as it's been conceived existentially. So we'll start with the temporality of Dasein and taking care of time. So circumspect taking care, we've seen, is grounded in temporality in the mode of a making present that awaits and retains. We saw that a few videos ago. And so we have, remember, just to recap quickly, we've got those three ecstasies: the awaiting, the making present, and the retaining. And the horizon, remember we talked about the horizon of temporality. Well, the horizon, Heidegger breaks that down here. So we have the horizon of awaiting is later on. The horizon or horizontal schema, this is, for making present is today, and retaining is earlier. So those three horizontal schemas, those three horizons within that horizontal schema, later on, today, and earlier. Remember, that's just like we described it, I think, as the field in which the ecstasies operate, or on which they manifest. But Heidegger adds something here, he adds another layer, which he calls the relational structure. And so this just takes the form of, for the future, it's a then when something happens. For the making present, it's a now that something is happening. And for the retaining, it's an on that former occasion when blah 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 something happened. So for example, maybe for the future, the relational structure is then when. Maybe an example would be then when I've finished making this video. So it's in the future. Now that that person is running or cooking or whatever. And on that former occasion when I saw you, or when we met, or something like that. So that's this extra layer that Heidegger adds. And this new information is what he calls dateability. And this is not data as in data, but data as in dating, date, time. And that's what it is, basically. It's just a date or a timestamp. And it's the way that we interpret ecstatic temporality. So when we're thinking about time, we assign events to it, or that's how we kind of track time meaningfully. We think about what happened or when it happened. In thinking about time, we fill that with events, and that is how we date time, is what Heidegger is saying there. And I'll just quickly put up on the screen for you a table I've got, and this hopefully will explain what I'm talking about. So you can see on the left side there the ecstasies: awaiting, making present, and retaining. In the middle is the inclusion of other ecstasies. So that, remember, an ecstasy never appears on its own. It always includes the other two. Then we have the horizon, and then at the end is the relational structure, the dateability. And so that is that's basically what we're talking about. So these horizons later on today and earlier, they also have this character of dateability, when something happens. And also the Dasein's occurrence. You remember the word occurrence is Dasein's in-betweenness or stretched alongness. It's that period. Well, not yeah. It's the between birth and death of Dasein. It's the Dasein's life, right? That occurrence is also dateable. So everything that happens in that inner life is dateable, and we date things that happen in that time, and we do this by subdividing the until then at some point in the future into segments of from then until then. So if you can imagine, like we think about the future, which is an until then, that point, and then we have a from then until then, and then a from then until that point, from then until that point. So we're kind of breaking up the our occurrence, our lives, into these smaller segments, and that is how we date our occurrence or our stretched alongness. And this is important because Heidegger calls these little divisions spans, and that we'll come back to that idea a little bit later on. So inauthentic existence loses itself in what is taken care of, and also loses its time in them as well. And we've all experienced that when you're engaged in something, immersed in something, taking care of something, we lose track of time. But I think Heidegger means it in a bigger sense than that. Not only when we're fully engaged, but as in like minutes or hours, but we often lose time for greater periods of time, days or weeks, or even over an entire lifetime. It seems Heidegger's intimating here. And that would be a lifetime lived inauthentically. On the other hand, authentic existence always has time, never loses it. It has time because the moment, capital M moment, is maintained in the future that has been. So it's kind of like being just maintaining that kind of awareness of oneself and one's own existence and what that means, and kind of living with this awareness and this understanding. And that's authentic existence. So anyway, since dateability is a personal way of understanding time, well, I say it's kind of personal, I mean it relates to the individual. We each date things differently. We each interpret time with different events, so my now or your now will be different to my now because we have different events by which we date that now. So it's kind of personal, and since it is personal, Heidegger needs to make it universalize it. And to this end, he says it's made public, and it's made public on the basis of ecstatic being in the world. And basically the idea here is that although each individual Dasein dates time differently, the now expressed is always interpreted the same way. And so it's kind of like it's not really an agreement, but this idea of time being made public, publicness of time, it's just like even though we each have a different we date time differently, there is kind of something in common. We all agree that the now, which I date by this event, is the same now which you date by a different event. So there is that kind of underlying understanding and similarity. Okay, and so that's time being made public. So the next section I have is time taken care of and within timeness. So here Heidegger wants to understand this phenomenal character of the time that makes itself public for being in the world. So we just want to delve a little bit deeper into this idea. What is this public time that we're all kind of participating in? And encountering beings in public time, Heidegger calls within time, or encountering them within time. And that's what the within timeness means in that heading that I used. So he has a story here about how public time was derived. And it basically goes like this. The Dasein uses the sun or daylight to reckon time, to measure time, to count time. And it's only because during daylight hours the Dasein can work that we do this. Work meaning to take care of things in the world. So we have this understanding, we reckon time by using the sun, and that's because during the day when the sun is out, we're able to work, we're able to take care of things. And so through this circumspect taking care of things, we interpret time as dateable, and the relations of significance naturally emerge from this way of thinking. And the whole point of this story is to understand or to realize that the first clock, the first timepiece, emerges from the fact that Dasein's existence is worldly. So this understanding we have of time, which we've said is dateable, has those spans, and is made public, that is ultimately rests on Dasein's worldly existence, Dasein's taking care of things in the world. And so once he's established that, we have this idea that time taken care of is all those things I just mentioned: dateable, spanned, public, and belongs to the world itself. It's worldly. It's worldliness. And this Heidegger calls world time. And this is, and it's kind of like a, it's phenomenal, right? It's phenomenal understanding of time, and it's so in that sense, it's basically lived and meaningful for people, for Dasein. I think I can't say it any clearer than that. At the end of this section, there's an interesting note as well. Heidegger says the world time is neither subjective nor objective. But not for the reason you might think. It's not objective because it's more objective than any possible object could be. And that's because with the disclosedness of the world, it always already becomes ecstatically and horizontally objectified as the condition of the possibility of inner-worldly beings. A long little quote, but basically all it means is, he says it's more objective than any possible object because it's the condition. Time, world time, is the condition on which all inner-worldly beings become possible. So it's not an object, and it's not just another object in the world. It's more objective than any object, and that's because it makes possible all objects. And the same thing holds for subjectivity. It's not subjective because it's more subjective than any possible subject could be. And again, for the same reason, it first makes possible the being of the factically existing self. It's only because of world time that Dasein can, or the being of Dasein can come into being. And for that reason, it's not subjective, it's more subjective than any possible subject. It's like, it's kind of like saying it's prior to subject and object, because it's what makes, it is what makes the prior, it's what gives that prior to any meaning. So that's kind of interesting as well, their world time. So we've gone kind of like from temporality to world time, temporality being like that underlying structure, I guess, that that grounds being in the world and Dasein, to this other understanding of time, which is world time, and that's a more kind of personal, phenomenally interpreted notion of time. And the last section I have here is called Within Timeless and the Genesis of the Vulgar Concept of Time. So looking here, we can start looking here at the clock, and because the clock represents how we orient ourselves towards time. Obviously, it's how we measure time, but it's more than that. It's the way we understand time is reflected in the clock. But in this mode of making present, as seen on a clock face, the nows are counted, and world time is reduced to what Heidegger calls now time. So it's like you're counting moments, counting instants, like following the second hand of a clock around. So it's the world time, which was, remember, lived, meaningful, significant, is now reduced to this sequence of instants, of nows. And this is what Heidegger calls the vulgar understanding of time, a succession of constantly present nows that pass away and arrive. And when we reduce time to this, what we end up doing is covering over the dateability, the worldliness, the spannedness, and the publicness, and also the significance of world time. And it also levels down the ecstatic and the horizontal constitution of temporality. So it's basically just like draining the essence out of original temporality, and also out of world time, which is the way we, the kind of phenomenal way that we interpret original temporality. So something else with this vulgar interpretation of time as a succession of nows, that also means that time becomes infinite. As it's just a succession of nows, we can imagine that and see it going on forever, right? And we can see that it has gone on forever in the past. And so this is like the ultimate covering over for Heidegger, because we've already seen that temporality and world time as well, because they're both intimately bound up with Dasein and with being in the world. They're both finite. Temporality is finite, remember. Anticipation is a finite understanding. And that's what makes, that's what gives authenticity to our resoluteness. And so, so this is just like draining everything of value and meaning out of human existence. temporality. And so the result is that Dasein becomes lost in what it takes care of. And I've got one more quote, as I always do, to finish with here. So in seeing how temporality is the ground for the vulgar interpretation of time, Heidegger calls temporality primordial time. And he summarizes it like this. Ecstatic and horizontal temporality temporalizes itself primarily out of the future. However, the vulgar understanding of time sees the fundamental phenomenon of time in the now, and indeed in the sheer now, cut off in its complete structure that is called the present. And so that's kind of hinting at what I said earlier. We've got original temporality or primordial time, and then we interpret that as world time, again, which is still meaningful and relevant, significant to us. And then we now have this vulgar understanding of time, which Heidegger called now time. And that's just been robbed of any kind of vital essence that it may have had. And since temporality underpins is the meaning of care, then it does the same thing for Dasein itself, for being in the world. And that is being in time, done. So yeah, if you made it that far, good job, congratulations. I hope you managed to get through Being in Time, the book as well, and definitely check out some of those other books. There's one, Stephen Mulhall, I forget the title, Being in Time, something along those lines. Stephen Mulhall. Actually, I can. Heidegger's Being in Time. Check this one out. Heidegger's Being in Time. Stephen Mulhall. That's a really good book. Also, this one is good. A bit denser, a bit harder working, a bit more difficult to get through this one. Heidegger's Temporal Idealism, William Blattner. That's also good. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I hope these videos have helped, clarified. It's been good for me, I kind of clarifies things for me as well, so it's win-win, I guess. Cool. Anyway, thank you. I'll see you the next time I get a video done, which I'm thinking of doing on Nietzsche. So keep an eye out for that. Anyway, thanks a lot for listening, and good luck. See you next time.